very, very long CV that has been condensated by your colleague, but I would like to point out at least two major issues. One is that he has been Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That means that he has been the head of the Italian diplomacy for several years. And now he is the president of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, that is an institution that has, I would say, 85 years, is 85 years old, that the young, 60, sorry, that has been founded just by one of the most important Italian political thinker, and at the moment is one of the most prestigious think tank here in Italy. They have a very intensive and very important calendar of events. They are often publicized. Sometimes they are just Chatham House by invitation. But I am sure that if you are interested in following the debate and also these events that are happening every week, every second week, you can watch on their site, and maybe you can follow, because they are extremely high level. So I would like to ask Georgia to come to give to make the presentation, and I would like you to ask to you a round of applause for Ambassador Valensise. Grazie.
Good morning, everyone. Today, I had the honor of introducing to you all a figure whose career stands as a model of both diplomatic excellence and public service, Ambassador Michele Valensise. Ambassador Valensise entered the Italian diplomatic service in 1975, beginning a distinguished career that was spanned over 4 decades. His early assignments took him to the Directorate of Economic Affairs, and then abroad to Brazilian and Bonn Italian embassies, and even in Beirut, as a counselor during the Lebanese Civil War. Starting from 1991, he served as first counselor at Italy's permanent representation to the European Union in Brussels, before being appointed ambassador to Sarajevo in 1997, where he played a key role in post-war stabilization efforts. Back in Rome from 2001 to 2004, he was head of the Press and Information Service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and spokesperson for ministers Renato Ruggero, Silvio Berlusconi, and Franco Frattini. In 2012, he was appointed Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most senior position in the diplomatic corps, a role that he held until 2016. Beyond public service, Ambassador Valensise has continued to contribute to Italy's institutional and business life. He served as Vice President of Astaldi, and since 2018, he has been a member of the Board of Directors of TIM. He also serves as President of Villa Vigoni, the Italian-German Center for European Dialogue, a position he was appointed to by both governments. Ambassador Valensise's voice remains vital in today's diplomatic and cultural dialogue, and we have the privilege to hear directly from him today. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Michele Valensise.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Many ladies, few gentlemen, which is a promising sign. Sorry for you. And first of all, let me complete the information that Giorgio Bartolomucci just gave you. The thinker to which he was referring to has also a name. His name was Altiero Spinelli. And Spinelli is, as Giorgio said, an important figure in our cultural and political life, since he was the greatest visionary about Europe. He wrote a famous document, Manifesto di Ventotene, in the faraway 1941, still during the war. And he was dreaming about the unification of the European countries and European peoples. And what is amazing is that this thought or this vision took place in a moment in which not only there was war in Europe, but the war was not at all decided. The developments of the war and the victory of the democracies against the dictatorship was not at all clear or evident. So that adds some value to the courageous and very bright vision of Altiero Spinelli. That is the heritage in which the institute I'm the president of is moving ahead nowadays. Now, this being said, I was asked to talk about something that has no title, so I risk to be a bit lost, but I take it as a challenge for what we can say perhaps together after my short presentation. I would be glad to answer your question or listen to your comments to what I will try and summarize. I would like to say a few words about the international order, the challenges of to the international orders. And I know you're students of university level of political sciences, international relations, so I will be necessarily telegraphic, not to repeat things that you know very well. But let me stress at the beginning just a couple of points. From the end of the Second World War to the fall of the Berlin Wall, Europe and the world lived in a rather clear system of balance. We had two main superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. There were tensions, of course, because they represented two different ideas of the world. The one was a liberal democracy, the other one was an autocratic system, an authoritarian system with no freedom at all. So there were contrasts, there were contradictions among these two systems, but there was a balance. And this balance, despite all the tensions we experience in the world, was good enough, in some way, good enough to keep the world in a stable position and Europe in a stable position. So contraposition, but stability. Then, as you remember, although you were probably not yet born, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Europe was suddenly and nearly miraculously and peacefully reunificated. The Soviet Union as such collapsed, and what stayed as Russia, as the original core of the Soviet Union, whereas the other countries that had belonged to the Soviet world shifted apart and became members both of the European Union and of the NATO, of the Transatlantic Alliance. There we experienced at least 10 years of a period that we can define as an illusion. Why do we say illusion? Because it was the illusion that, as you might have heard, the story had finished. There was no contradiction anymore between countries of different orientation. There was only practically one history, the history of the winner, the history of the West, the history of the United States. And the rest would have followed in terms of political, economic rules and praxis. This was an illusion because under the fire, there was something under the wakes, there was still something burning. And what was burning was a kind of frustration, revendication by the eastern part of Europe, mainly by Russia, that felt frustrated, even humiliated by the disintegration of the Soviet Union and by the alleged imposition of rules that belonged not to both of the countries, to both of the superpowers, but belonged essentially to one superpower, the winner of the Cold War, that is to say, the US and the West. So we came through a phase of turbulence and then through a phase of open revindication of a major role, especially by the former Soviet Union, that was following a kind of dream of reshape the old Soviet and even older Tsarist empire. That is how we come to the present situation, to the present war, which, as you know, between Russia and Ukraine is not yet finished. And these developments did not take place suddenly out of the blue, but had a long period of preparation. In this preparation, there were signs quite clear of the direction that Russia would have liked to take. I take just a very few examples. First, for those who have perhaps curiosity for this kind of things, there was a very important declaration in form of a speech, or a famous speech of Mr. Putin in 2007. So that means already 18 years ago, when he came to Munich to the conference on security in Europe, and put clearly the issue of the unsatisfactory balance that the world had reached at that point. Putin said clearly, we don't like it. We cannot accept that the world is ruled under rules that we do not recognize, that neglect our sovereignty, neglect our possibility to expand ourselves, to develop ourselves, to become what we were before. So that was also already a clear sign of creeping and not so creeping only unsatisfaction. Then you might remember that there was an operation in Georgia in 2008, a military aggression of Russia against Georgia in 2008. Then there was the illegal annexion by Russia of Crimea in 2014. There was the explosion of some very strong military tensions in the eastern part of Ukraine, in the area which is contested now, called Donbass. That kind of violence went on for at least 8 years, till 2022. We arrived at the beginning of 2022, when Russia decided to use force to reestablish an order in inverted commas in Ukraine, so to impose its will practically. And that was a moment of breaking of a basic rule that had accompanied us for at least 80 years. Which rule am I talking about? I'm talking about the basic rule that implies the respect of national sovereignty and implies the respect of territorial integrity for each country. This was not the case, because it was evident that one big country, Russia, invaded another smaller country, Ukraine, and therefore it violated not only the national sovereignty, but the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So that was a kind of revolution in our established order. This revolution has not yet finished. We, as Italians, as Europeans, as Western, I would say as citizens of the world, we do hope that this tragedy does come to an end as soon as possible. And we will elaborate perhaps shortly why is it so difficult to come to an end of the war at this stage? But why do we all have to engage ourselves in trying to reach, first of all, a truce, and then a veritable and just peace? What is the background against which these developments take place? Well, the background is rather clear to define. There are at least three major players at this stage in the world on the international scene. And these three major players have, each of them has a particular agenda. The first player is the United States. The United States has been for several generations, for at least 80 years, the guarantor of peace, security, and stability in Europe. As you know, we are part of the the transatlantic alliance of the NATO, and the basis, the core business of NATO is that the allied countries engage themselves to defend another of the allies should he be attacked. So it is a defensive alliance in which each member promises to the others solidarity and, if necessary, support, even military support, should one be attacked. This alliance held for at least 80 years. Now we are experiencing a kind of light but decisive disengagement from Europe, from the European countries, by the American administration. Why? Because the American administration has other priorities, not only with the Trump administration, but also with the previous administration. Asia and the Pacific area became much more relevant for the balance of the world, for the global agenda. And so there is a kind of lack of attention and diminishing attention for the destiny of Europe. There is a request to the Europeans, which is also legitimate, a request that the Europeans contribute much more to their own defense than they did before. So in other words, there is a kind of coming back of the United States to the US interests. There is a kind of even isolation, which is not improvised by the US, but it is part of a much broader strategy. And with this reality, although being allied with the United States, we Europeans have to consider this reality in a realistic way. Second actor of the scene is China. China has experienced in the last 30 years an incredible development. 30 or 40 years ago, you went around Beijing only by bike. Now it is a champion. China is a champion of technological development, of industrial progress, and it's a country that is proud of taking its destiny in his hands, has a global vision of the world, and has the proud of being able to expand their interest, to expand their influence much more than we looked at in the previous year. So it is not an emerging country anymore. It's an emerged country from all point of view, in great and open competition for the lead of the world with the United States. So there is a competition which is not anymore America-Russia, but it's certainly America-China. There is a third actor, which we are busy with, that is Russia. And Russia is a country that has not yet decided what he wants to be as a grown-up, because there is an evident sentiment of frustration because Russia is not the Soviet Union anymore. Russia is not the Tsar Empire anymore. But it's not clear what Russia would like to be. There is an evident competition or contrast with the West, but there is also some competition with China. China has become the major brother of the elder brother of, or the elder sister of Russia. It is much richer, much more equipped, much more dangerous from a certain point of view in the global competition, and is seen with double feelings by Russia, as in this phase certainly as a protector and as a supporter against the West, but also with a kind of fear of being eaten by such a big country, which is at least 10 times as big in terms of demography than Russia, and 10 times or even more stronger from the economic point of view. These are the three main actors that play on the international scene. We are probably forgetting a fourth and less equipped actor, but still not to be forgotten, which is Europe. Why do I say less equipped? Because in this time in which it looks like if the force of the right is somehow inverted by the right of the force, we Europeans have some difficulties because we are not a military power. We have no common foreign policy which is working. We have not a common defense. What we have is our culture, our tradition of respect of freedom, of rights, and we have a huge and very interesting market. Yes, this is certainly true. So we are certainly an economic subject, an economic power, with less strength, at least now, from the political and and even less from the military point of view. But still, we are an element of stability, despite our weaknesses, despite our inefficiency somehow to adopt decisions. We are still a point of reference for many countries in the world. And this is something that we should not under-evaluate, taking into account what we can do with our instruments, what we can mobilize in terms of consensus at international level. So we are perhaps the weakest from this point of view of the four, but not the least of the protagonists, not the least important of the protagonists at this stage on the international scene. Certainly, Europe might play a more relevant role, if it were more united, more coherent in its action, if countries were really able to give priority to a common interest rather than to single national interests. And certainly we would be more efficient and we would have more authority should we be able to have a mechanism of decision faster and more appropriate to the different and to the challenges and to the different challenges that we have to face. Let me be more concrete. How do the European leaders decide upon the common decisions. There are a few matters, a growing number of matters, that are decided by the rule of the majority, by the majority rule. Imagine a building where the owners of the different flats recognize that some decisions of this building have to be taken by majority. So if you have to repair the lift, or if you have to clean the entrance, you don't need to have the general consensus of the owners or of the inhabitants of the buildings. It is sufficient that 70% or 60% or sometimes 51% of these owners or of these inhabitants decide that, yes, the lift has to be repaired, the entrance has to be cleaned. And so they go ahead. Europe has this rule for some issues, but not for all issues. And for the most delicate and for the most sensitive issues, it has no majority rule decision mechanism. It has a mechanism which is the opposite of the majority rule, that is unanimity. What does unanimity mean? It means that we all have to agree on what we what we get as a proposal. Nice principle, but in reality, unanimity also means that any single member of the European Union, as any single member of the building, of the condominium in the building, has the right to block a decision, has the right to say no, and therefore to jeopardize the necessary unanimity. Is this a problem for Europe? I personally think it is. I think that we should reduce more the area of matters, of issues in which unanimity is required. I accept other opinions, I respect other opinions, or the opposite opinion that says, no, we have to be careful because otherwise who knows where the majority rule can lead us. It can lead us to decisions that we on a national basis are not very in agreement with. But that is a risk of any assembly or of any association that is trying to look ahead and not only to have sufficient mechanism to block this or that decision. One word on Italy. What do we do? I know there are a few Italian colleagues among you, but there are also some foreign students with you. So where do we stand, and what has Italy to say at this stage of the championship? Italy was a founding member of the European Union, as you know, and has always been growing, has always been developing itself under the umbrella of a strong European solidarity. This has become part of our political culture till the moment in which there was a school of thought that reproached to the European Union, first to the European community, then to the European Union, a series of disadvantages, a series of constraints or of obstacles, alleged obstacles to our growth, to our development. Where does this unsatisfaction come from? It comes probably from the fact, from an objective fact, that Europe, above all in the last period, concentrated itself in a regulatory activity that became very large, very broad, very intrusive. So there are, someone calculated that the kilometers of the European regulation would be equal like twice the round of the whole Earth if you put them on a stripe And if you put one regulation after the other, one piece of paper after the other. So the critical approach is based on the fact that there is too much regulation, less freedom, therefore, for national interests, and an incredible and appalling amount of bureaucracy that sacrifices the real need for Europe to decide on basic things, on important things, and on the contrary, with the critics of concentrating on secondary issues with this mass of bureaucratic tools. Now, if you want to have my sincere opinion, this is a reasonable argument, but up to a certain point. So the fact that Europe has had some manifestation of excessive bureaucratism does not justify the critic as such to Europe, does not justify the fact of being frontally critical towards an alliance that guaranteed us not only freedoms, not only progress, but great developments and common developments, and guaranteed to us all Europeans the fact of being able to implement and to fulfill national interests in a most efficient and in a most impacting way. Only one example, and then I will stop because I'm curious to know if you are asleep or if you're still awake. The best example you can make is probably the one about trade. Trade is one of the competences that was delegated by the member states to the supranational level, to the Commission in this case, and to the community level. That is to say, when it comes to agreements with third countries, the competence to negotiate and to conclude agreements belongs not to the single member states, but to the Commission as such, that negotiates in the name of the whole European Union. Of course, to negotiate in the name of the European Union, the Commission has to pick up and synthesize the interests of the whole building, of the whole membership of the European Union. And that has proven to be an element of strength, because one thing is to negotiate one-to-one with giants like the US or China. Another much more promising way is to negotiate as a team where the interests are common or tend to be common, and where the specific interests of the single national states can be better represented in a team, in an alliance, rather than singularly. We have a lot of evidence of this that I'm trying to say, and one of the most recent proofs of this is probably the negotiation on the barriers, on the tariffs with the US. You might have heard that the US administration imposed a serial or threatened to impose a serial of tariffs on our goods. And the reply, according to the treaty, to the European treaty, was a common reply. Weak, strong, we can discuss about that, but it was a common reply. And I am confident that it was a much better reply than it would have been with 27 different single and certainly weaker replies by the member state. So there is room for improvement at the European level. There is room for adjusting the rules so that this big and strange monster, which is the European Union, works well. But perhaps there is room also for what is basic and even more important than the two aspects that I just mentioned. And that is the awareness, the conscience by the European public opinion, that in Europe there are more things that despite all differences, which are natural and which are also to be preserved, because they're a matter of richness, but despite all differences, there are much more elements that unite us rather than elements that divide us at European level. Let's not forget also the fact that the first idea, the first hardcore of the European integration was the need to overcome struggles and even wars among European countries, France and Germany above all, that had struggled one against the other, that had fought a war, or two wars at least, one against the other, and that from 1945 till today live together in peace and in a good and growing cooperation. So let's not lose sight from this original approach of the European leaders, among which Altiero Spinelli, the one we started this short chat with. So I would stop here for the moment. I hope I was not too long, not too short. And I now, with your permission, drink a glass of water and I'm curious to hear what you will have to comment or to say to destroy my arguments. Huh?
Hi, I'm Aurora. I'm an Italian student. So my question was about the tariffs imposed by the US, like to many countries, but especially those imposed on Europe. So since the very long relationship between the US and Europe, like I wanted to know, in your opinion, like what's the actual intent of the US, like in this specific period of time?
I hear a great, not a great acoustic. The question was about the relation between US and Europe as far as tariffs are concerned. How do we tackle this issue of tariffs?
Yeah, exactly.
At best.
Yeah.
Shall I pick other questions, or you want me?
Whatever you prefer.
One after the other? Okay, I'll try and answer shortly. The tariff policy of the new Trump administration is a global challenge. It's not something that concerns Europe. It's something that concerns, as we saw, the rest of the world. So China, India, even Russia, and other Latin America, and other countries, even Africa, theoretically, because nobody had explained to President Trump that the exports of Africa towards the United States are minimal. So it's difficult to imagine a working policy based on tariffs if you apply it to someone that doesn't export nearly anything to your country. But anyhow, let's not be polemical with President Trump. Let's try and not be polemical. So this is a global challenge, okay? How do you tackle at best? Well, there is only one way of coming out of this trouble, and that is negotiation. The approach that the US has taken to this very delicate matter, delicate for us, for an exporting reality like we are in Italy and we are in Europe, the approach that the US have does not recommend a frontal war of trade with the US. Why? Because this leverage of the trade risks to be managed with an enormous brutality that can basically hurt our interests much more than the American interests can be hurt. So this is objective. America is a strong country. It has sufficient means also to resist to some tariffs, not to all these tariffs policy. So the best way in the methodology is to negotiate. How do you negotiate with a country like this? Well, as far as Europe is concerned, we just said that the advantage is of being able to represent a broader interest than the single country. It is a matter which should be evident because it is a relation of force. The European force might come near to the force of the United States in terms of commercial power. No European country, even the biggest, even Germany, who is the biggest European economy, might compete on an equal or on a nearly equal basis with the United States. So there is an advantage of size, of dimension, that strengthens our position. And the second thing is that you have to negotiate in a smart way, in an intelligent way. That is to say, trying to convince our American friends, our American partners, that some of the measures that are threatened or are applied by the United States are certainly damaging the European interests, but are objectively damaging the American interests. There is no winner in this competition, in this derby. There is no winner. So our strength, our action of moral suasion, our diplomatic action should be the one to resist, to countermeasure, but not to countermeasure with the heavy artillery, because otherwise we go into a trade escalation, exactly like we would go in a conventional war. But to do the minimum, what is necessary to protect our goods, yes, but also leaving the door open to a broader negotiation, to a broader appreciation of the basic interests of the countries concerned, of Europe, but again, also as the American interests are concerned. When I say American interests, I refer, as you certainly know, to inflation, to increase of prices, to collapse of some industrial activities that might be paradoxically jeopardized, not protected by the imposition of tariffs in the American market. So there's a lot of consequences, like the economists. There must be someone of you who studies economy. It is quite reassuring that the economists are nearly all agreeing on the fact that the imposition of tariffs is a pattern, is an economic pattern that belongs to the 19th century, to the 20th century at latest, but certainly not to this world, which is so interconnected, so integrated, and where the ones need the others. And the fact of cooperating at a lower level of trade tariffs is of advantages for both sides, or for all the whole circus that is based on trade.
Hello, my name is Michele, and I wanted to ask you a question, not precisely about what you talked, but about your previous experience. It was mentioned that you were the ambassador to Beirut during the Lebanese civil war. So if you were there at the time, how it felt during the start of Operation Freedom to Galilee, and how it felt in Beirut during the start of the Operation Freedom to Galilee. That's Israeli invasion, and how you negotiate or proceed diplomatically in a country in the middle of civil war with two separate powers invading it at the same time. So thank you. That's the question.
Thank you. Good question. That was an exciting period of my professional life. That was more than 30 years ago. So I was not an ambassador, because otherwise I would be 120 now year old. No, I was the deputy ambassador at the time in Beirut. We had a small office. It was Lebanon is an amazing, was and is an amazing country. Is a very special country in the Middle East, because it has, this is a paradox that I'm saying, it has a tradition of living together, of being respectful of minorities, of being the mosaic of several minorities. There is not one Lebanese group. There are several Lebanese groups. Christians, several groups of Christians, Sunnis, Druze, Shiite, Palestinians, several religious confessions that have a political relevance, because the constitution respects or is somehow prisoner of these religious differences. But these are all groups that even during the war somehow lived together. So the amazing thing was that there was a conflict, there was a brutal war, there were dead, destructions, but you also had a kind of way of living together that comes from the diversity and from the composition of this small country. It's a small country because it has not more than 4 or 5 million inhabitants, but characterized by the fact of the diversity. The richness of the country comes from the diversity of the people. Serving in a country in war is an experience, because you have to reckon with a different reality than in a normal country. In a normal country, you go to the president, you go to the minister, you have meetings. There, the trick of the work for all the foreigners, for all the foreign diplomats, was to negotiate and talk to and refer to the ones who had really the power. Who had the power? The different armed groups, the different militias. There were government within the governments within the government. So you had a formal government, very formal, that had no grip, that had no control on the situation, that did not physically control the territory, that was not in the position to impose taxes, was not in the position to confiscate weapons, or to act like a constituted an institution. And the power was split into several groups of influence, political parties, and each political party had a small army serving the party. So that was, of course, sometimes it was also dangerous. It was very labor intensive, because it's not that you went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and you had a good conversation and you came back with the vision or with a program of what you had to do. You had to concentrate your energies in this split groups. But for a diplomat, or for a young diplomat, it was like a great school of patience, of methodology, of analysis, which was not automatic, which was not simple, but it is as if we had gone to a good school, to a good high school, so that we could go to a good university after Beirut. This being said, Lebanon was also an incredible country. I don't want to become sentimental, but the Lebanese people are people traditionally and historically open to trade. They have a great economic tradition. They're traders. basically, historically, traders between East and West. They were a bridge between the Eastern countries, the Arab world, and Europe. There is a great majority of people who speak French and English like nobody else does in Arab countries, apart from Arabic. And it is a country with an idea of freedom that you then did not find in any other country of the region. For instance, that was also an amazing element of our work. The press was free. The communication was free. Radio, televisions were able to broadcast and to print whatever they wanted, and they took advantage of this freedom. In contrast with the neighbors, where you had organized countries, but where you had censorship, where you had control by the governments, where you had people that were imprisoned because they had said or they had broadcasted something wrong or something that the government did not like. In the great mess of a civil war, in the great confusion and in the great risk of violence, this is something that paradoxically never happened in Lebanon. In Lebanon, nobody was ever arrested because he had said or written something considered wrong, considered dangerous for the government, for the simple reason that there was no government. But I could go on for a long time. I don't want to be boring with the others, but the question you put about Lebanon is something that should also remind us that this experiment of freedom and of tolerance, despite the war, is something that we should not impose, but suggest to many countries in the region, taking the origin also especially from the Lebanese example.
Hi, my name is Luca. My question is, what are the tips that you would give to young people to enter the diplomatic environment? Like, for example, in your case.
What would I recommend? What would I suggest to young people for a diplomatic future, for a diplomatic activity? Is that your question? Sorry, but I hear you very badly. Well, if I had one word, if I only had one word to reply, I would say curiosity. You have to be driven by curiosity. You should have curiosity. If you're not curious, do something else. Be a dentist or be a football player, but don't be a diplomat. A good diplomat is, above all, a curious woman or a curious man. It has to be, he or she has to be curious about something which is outside of his or her culture, outside of her world, outside of her habits, outside of her known things, of her comfort zone. No? Starting with attitudes, traditions, history. So you have to go to a place and not pretend that you know everything, of course. You have to go to a place with the curiosity of the one that starts the first day of school. So what can I learn in this country? What can I absorb from this country? How can I understand that the country works? And what can I do to improve the way that this country and my country act together, collaborate together, are closer, have closer relations? So the first motivation is and should be curiosity. Then there is perhaps another feeling. I don't want to be rhetoric above all with young people. There is the feeling and the awareness of manipulating, of being a very small part, but still a part of a broader projection of interests. So when you're a diplomat, you do not represent a factory that has to sell tennis shoes to the market or to the Lebanese market. You don't represent a limited sectorial interest. When you're a diplomat, you represent a general interest, a broad interest, which is the interest of your country, and that has to be identified also clearly and with some accuracy. Why do I say accuracy? Because I don't know any ambassador or any diplomat that before leaving his country to go and work abroad gets a piece of paper in which his or her government says to him, look, this is our interest, go and do this, and you have to do this, this, and this. It doesn't work like this. It works like this in the films, at cinema, but not in reality. In reality, there is a process of progressive steps towards the recognition of what is interesting, what am I here to do, what should I do exactly to implement, to fulfill at best our national or international interests. So that is also a learning process that you live by exercising curiosity, by exercising your capacity to listen, to study, to analyze. So at the end of the day, it's not a holiday to be a diplomat, but it's a good period of your life that you can in which you can invest, and from which you can also have sometimes some very good satisfactions. This again is you put a question that would lead us, might lead us very, very far away. So I prefer to limit myself to this very short flashes.
Good morning, my name is Cecilia, and I wanted to ask, since you mentioned that Russia basically expressed its position towards Ukraine almost 20 years before the actual war, do you think that more could have been done at the diplomatic level to avoid this conflict today? Thank you.
This is a very good question. I as a diplomat, or as every diplomat, we are convinced that there is only one way to go ahead, one way to avoid wars, one way to conclude wars, that is negotiation. So there must be always, there must always be a positive prejudice, a positive inclination towards any solution or any attempt to negotiate anything. And everything is negotiable, and is more and more true in a world in which the interests are so intertwined, are so connected. The world has become much smaller than it was 100 years ago. So negotiation must be our absolute compass. In the specific case of Russia and Ukraine, there have probably been some mistakes on all sides. On the Western side, I would say there has probably been a communication mistake, a mistake in terms of explaining what our real intentions were, and of convincing Russia that we were not at all a threat to Russian interests. That is the narrative on which in 2022 the conflict has been justified by Russia. Russia attacked Ukraine because it was sincerely or less sincerely convinced that there was a threat of the West towards Russia. I must say, possible mistake in terms of communication, but certainly not a mistake in terms of action, because if you reread the history, the recent history of those years, you see that there were a lot of steps, not only one, a lot of steps in which many European, many Western leaders tried their best to convince, by a negotiation, by dialogue, to convince Moscow that there was not at all the minimum intention to be dangerous, to represent a danger for Russia. And that would have been also logical, because why to contest, or why to attack, or why to be aggressive with a country with which we had a very fruitful cooperation? We had cheap energy from Russia. We had a good industrial cooperation with Russia. We were till the very, very last moment in the NATO-Russia Council, and we were the last ones to be willing to abandon this framework of dialogue. It would have been contrary to all our interests from a logical point of view to attack or to be aggressive towards Russia. So there were some attempts. You might remember a serial of conversations around this very, very long table where Putin received his Western countries, where he was sitting at one side and the Western guests were sitting at the other side. That was all an attempt to have a political solution, a negotiated solution, recognizing some interests, recognizing some concerns of Russia, but trying to avoid the tragedy that is a war. Why? Because a war is very easy to start, and as we see, it's very difficult to end. So I think if there were some mistakes on our sides, there were mistakes in terms of communication, in terms of dialogue, but not in terms of gesture of action. And the basic mistake was the greatest mistake, I think, was on the Russian side, to imagine, as they did at the beginning, that through a very short military operation you would have gained, you would have won a whole country. So that was a mistake also in terms of analysis, because the Russians, which have an important secret service, an important service of intelligence, did completely neglect the fact that in Ukraine, after 30 years of independence, there was a national sentiment that they did not take into real consideration. Well, I don't know if I was clear enough for your clever question. So thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. I should not finish, but I think I was instructed to be here for 1 hour, and I stayed here for 1 hour and 5 minutes.
Are there any other? We can extend the time for 5 minutes if there are any other questions. No other questions?
Final remarks. Would you like to end it? Okay.
If there is an urgent question that keeps you from away from the spaghetti, I'm ready to take it. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attention. And best wishes to you all.